All right, RAW versus JPEG. The first point I'm going to make is that if you do not plan on editing your photos using a post-processing software program like Photoshop or Lightroom, then you should be shooting in JPEG. If you do plan to use software like Photoshop or Lightroom, then I would recommend RAW. It would be to your benefit to shoot in RAW images, give you a lot more detail than JPEG. I like to think of RAW and JPEG kind of like when you're shooting on your camera and you're using manual versus auto. When you shoot in JPEG, your camera decides for you. Just like if you shoot in auto, your camera is deciding the settings for you. When you shoot in RAW, you get to choose how you are going to process your image. Just like if you're shooting in manual, you get to decide what settings your camera is going to be using. You can make slight adjustments to JPEG once your camera's processed it, but you are limited to how far you can push the limit, like for highlights and shadows. Let's talk about the pros and cons of each. We'll start with the pros of JPEG. It is a smaller size, so it's going to be much easier to store more images. There isn't a lot of processing that is needed if you want to leave it as is. Perfect. It's really a great option for everyday photos. The camera does all the work for you, so you don't have to do anything. The convenience of a JPEG is awesome because you don't have to do anything, so it is way more convenient to shoot a JPEG. JPEGs are more universally read by computers, so you can share it with anybody. So let's talk about the cons of a JPEG. You have more limits on what you can adjust. If your image is under or overexposed, you're not going to be able to bring those details back. You're kind of stuck with what it is. Since the camera is deciding the processing for you, there isn't as much room for creativity and you can't change the image as much as maybe you would like to. Now let's talk about the pros of a RAW image. The camera captured all of the details, so you can go back and bring that image back to where you saw it in real life. You have the freedom to be so much more creative with your image and how you want it to look. You can change the white balance after you take the photo. You can go in and say, oh, I actually want it to be sunny condition or cloudy condition. And it's just a click of a button and you can easily change that white balance. So now let's talk about some cons for RAW images. You do have to process the image using a program like Lightroom or Photoshop, so it will cost you more money to process the image. Since the camera does collect more detail, the file will be way larger, so you won't be able to store as many images on your hard drive as you would JPEG. You can't share a RAW image unless you're sharing it with someone who can read a RAW image. Hopefully that helps you understand some of the RAW versus JPEG. Now, if you're unsure, you can also shoot in both RAW and JPEG. So when you go to your camera settings, you can click on RAW, JPEG, or RAW plus JPEG, and it will do both. I do shoot all of my images in RAW and RAW only. I used to do RAW and JPEG, and then I never did anything with the JPEG once I learned how to process them. So now I really only shoot in RAW. So if I had to pick just one, I would pick RAW. A lot of times if I'm out and about and I'm shooting with my camera, RAW, I will just take out my phone and snap a quick pic if I want to share it with somebody. If you don't know how to edit in Photoshop or Lightroom or a similar program, then you should choose JPEG until you can learn, of course, how to edit. In a big picture difference, if you look at size, the RAW is going to be huge and the JPEG will be smaller. That will matter when you're thinking of storage. Processing, RAW, you have to process the image. JPEG, the camera processes the image for you. And as far as creativity goes, RAW would be my choice to be more creative with your editing. And JPEG would be more, looks good, fine, conditions are great, that's what it is. So JPEG versus RAW, I would pick RAW.